thank you all for coming out on a cold winter afternoon. Ooh, rumbling. We're all here because we care about campaign finance reform. And I think we're all going to learn a lot this afternoon with our distinguished panel. You can't hear me?
Not very well.
Oh. Try to speak. Turn it up there. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to thank Mercy College for generously donating this lovely state-of-the-art auditorium that we're using today. We're very grateful to Mercy, and especially to Danielle Lambert, who has been here as our techie, I guess you could say, person helping us to get things on the computer. And I would also like to say a heartfelt thanks to all the members of the Rivertown League Board who tirelessly and enthusiastically all pitched in to make this event possible. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, Lindsay Feinberg, who has been the president of the Rivertown League for 10 years, at least. 10 years. And we're very proud. Lindsay got her law degree from New York Law School. And we're very proud to say that Lindsay is in great demand throughout Westchester County to be a moderator. She is one of the really Cadillac moderators, I guess you would say. So with that said, I will ask you to welcome our moderator, Lindsay Feinberg.
Thank you, Susan. And good afternoon. Welcome to all of you to this forum on campaign finance reform. As a nonpartisan organization devoted to voter education and good government for almost 100 years, the League of Women Voters is very concerned with campaign finance reform, especially in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in the case of the Citizens United case and the impediment that high campaign costs put in the way of candidates of modest means running for elected office. Our distinguished panelists will make a presentation concerning campaign finance reform, and then we'll entertain questions of the panelists. I would like to thank Sally Robinson, President of the League of Women Voters of New York State, Susan Lerner of Common Cause, Liz Kennedy of Demos, and Ian Vanderwalker of the Brennan Center for Justice, who have prepared to be here and come to engage in this panel forum. And now we will begin with a presentation by Sally Robinson. Oh, okay, thanks. I tried to turn up the microphone, but I didn't know how to do that. What I'm doing today is, as most of you probably know, the State League has been doing campaign finance reform forums throughout the state, and we're going to continue through the spring. I believe we have, currently more than 30 scheduled. These were made possible through a generous grant from the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation. And what I'm going to do today, because we have 3 other speakers, is I'm just going to cover some of the background and also get into a little bit of the weeds of New York State campaign finance law and the specific shortcomings. I mean, oftentimes these types of things don't get as much into the weeds, but getting into the weeds is a very league-like thing to do. So why does campaign finance reform matter? Apparently, those of you here today think it does because you're here today. And how it really matters is that the issues that you're concerned with on a day-to-day basis, they have a connection to government, and government is run by our elected officials. And in order to run a campaign, you need money. Communication and getting elected costs money. So we feel that improving New York State campaign finance laws and instituting fair elections and public financing is going to blunt the impact of money in campaigns. We feel that you need to reform the system so large contributions will not overwhelm the voice of the ordinary citizen in government. Elected officials now have to spend an inordinate amount of time raising money. When most of the money in politics comes from the few who can afford to contribute large amounts, the result is unequal political power. To give you an example, in 2012, in New York State, businesses, LLCs, and trade associations gave the most money. More than half of the money donated by individuals came from donors who gave $2,500 or more. How can we get there? We need to address both sides of the campaign funding equation. We need to lower contribution limits, increase disclosure so we know where the money came from and where it's been spent, and we need effective enforcement of those laws to create more trust from citizens in their government. Multiplying small donations will enable more people to run for office and will minimize the effects of big money in elections. What's wrong with unregulated campaign spending? Where we want to get to is we want to get to a system that achieves the goals of the right side of this chart, prevents corruption, ensures democracy, enhances transparency, reduces the time spent on fundraising, and keeps the cost of elections reasonable and increases electoral competition. So I'm just going to give you, Susan asked that I give you just a little bit of background. I'm going to go through this. We've got a lot of speakers here. I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly, but she asked me to give you a little background on legal background on campaign finance laws. Because the rights of free speech and association are cherished rights of this country, the Supreme Court has held that the government has to have a particularly good reason to place restrictions on the power of people and corporations to use their money to back the candidates of their choice. What cannot be limited by state and federal laws? State and federal laws cannot limit candidate spending except in the context of voluntary public financing. They can't limit independent expenditures by an individual or an entity. They can't limit contributions to entities that solely engage in independent expenditures. And they can't limit spending to influence ballot proposals. Now, most of you are very familiar with the Citizens, or heard of the Citizens United case. Citizens United did not address direct contributions to candidates or spending by candidates, but other Supreme Courts have addressed those issues. So, what Citizens United, we can still put effective, or we'll go to the next. Okay, go to the next slide here. What can you still do? You can have reasonable limits on the amount of contributions that can be made. You can provide for broad disclosure of who is giving money. You can provide for disclosure of independent expenditures that aren't coordinated with campaigns. You can provide for attribution of ads. You can establish effective enforcement. And you can provide for the public financing of elections, including matching grants that multiply small donations. How does current New York law stack up to what it could do? It does limit contributions by individuals and corporations, but those limits are sky high and loopholes abound. It prohibits the personal use of campaign funds, but those rules are so vague that use of campaign funds for personal expenditures is rampant. We have an enforcement body in New York State, but it's ruled by bipartisan politics, often gridlocked, understaffed, underfunded, and generally acknowledged to be ineffective. How high are New York State limits for contributions by individuals? In an election cycle, an individual can give, in 2012, over $60,000 in the gubernatorial race. Compare that to the $5,000 limit for U.S. president and the limit among the average among other states of $8,500 in gubernatorial races. How high are New York's limits to the Senate and Assembly? There you see that New York, and you see the national average amongst other states in dollars, again for the Assembly and for the rest of the country. Generally, a lot of states have special restrictions on the amount that lobbyists and contractors can contribute to candidates, so that because of the potential for corrupting influence is greater there. There's no pay-to-play restrictions in New York from lobbyists and state contractors. As a result, you can see that lobbyists play a very big role in funding campaigns in New York State. NYPIRG found that lobby firms, their PACs, their employees, contributed almost $2 million to state-level candidates and party committees in 2011. Lobbyists working for those firms contributed 70,000 times more dollars per capita as ordinary citizens. Now, granted, the ordinary citizen in New York State actually contributes very little, so it was starting from a low base there. New York State does not limit contributions to what it calls in New York State campaign finance parlance housekeeping accounts. Those are funds that parties are supposed to use for overhead expenses, including polls and get-out-the-vote drives. They're not supposed to directly benefit candidates, but they found a number of ways that they can indirectly benefit candidates using these housekeeping funds, and they're huge. More than $1 million here, for example, the cable industry contributed almost $3 million to housekeeping funds over the last 10 years. $1 million to the Senate Republican Campaign Committee housekeeping account, almost $500,000 to the Senate Campaign Committee housekeeping account. As I said earlier, New York is generally acknowledged to have very, very poor campaign finance enforcement. Without effective enforcement, candidates circumvent present campaign finance laws pretty much with impunity. Hundreds of donors every year give more money than allowed by state law. Many candidates fail to disclose the identity of the donors in the run-up to Election Day, and a NYPIRG study repeatedly finds that thousands of filings contain incomplete or incorrect information. Another generally acknowledged shortcoming in New York law is no meaningful limits on contributions from corporations. There is a $5,000 limit on corporate contributions to candidates, but corporate subsidiaries and LLCs can contribute many times to that $5,000 limit. Their subsidiaries are counted separately for the $5,000 limit, and LLCs actually are subject to the much higher limit that applies to individuals of $150,000 per year to all candidates. So that's pretty much, I think, a very whirlwind tour of the shortcomings of New York State campaign finance law. And I'll just finish up here, and I have a feeling that my friend Susan is not really going to say anything different when it comes to the way what we should do to reform these laws. The League's position is that we need to lower these sky-high contribution limits, close the loopholes, restrict or ban housekeeping accounts, clarify the restrictions on personal use, increase disclosure and transparency, and finally, and this is something that in particular the League has emphasized for many, many years, we need independent and effective enforcement of the campaign finance laws in New York.
Thank you so much, Sally Robinson. Our next speaker is Liz Kennedy from DMOC. Liz Kennedy.
your shenanigans, and then... Great. So I'm thrilled to be able to come up and speak with you all this afternoon and with my fellow panelists. Oh, is this... I'm just thrilled to talk to you about this. I thought that I would take a step back and that people might be interested in hearing more about generally what happened on the federal level with the campaigns and the just really amazing, huge outpouring of big money that we saw in the 2012 elections, because that really helps to set the stage for why New York can really be such a harbinger of progressive reform on these issues and should really be a leading light on that. So we at DEMOS, which is a nonpartisan public policy think tank in New York City working on both economic opportunity and political inequality issues, took a step back to look at all of this spending and to see what happened and then why it really matters to us generally. So total federal spending in these elections rose to over $5.2 billion in this cycle, which is just a huge increase over spending that we've seen previously. We released this, by the way, in our billion-dollar democracy report, the unprecedented role of money in the 2012 elections. I'm sorry that I don't have hard copies here for you, but you can find them on our website. So all of these figures will be included in there. So this, of course, doesn't actually include the spending that falls outside of certain time windows. You might know that one of the things is that a lot of problems that we've had with the system, one of the biggest ones is that a lot of the money currently being spent doesn't even need to be disclosed or tracked. So it can actually be difficult even to find that. The biggest difference that we saw in the 2012 elections is that outside spending shot up to over $1 billion. And this really was the result of both the Citizens United case and then coupled with a lower court case called Speech Now, which meant that, as Sally said, these independent, so-called independent spending groups that are meant to be spending not in coordination with the candidates, and therefore perhaps the courts consider them not to be directly corrupting government officials. But of course we saw that many of these donations were going directly to super PACs that were actually supporting particular candidates, or to 501c4 organizations that we'll see that were also supporting really specific candidates. So we don't believe that any of this is truly independent. A huge problem we saw in this cycle that we hadn't seen previously or prior to Citizens United was that we are now seeing a lot of dark money enter the system. That problem, of course, we can't tell who is giving this money, and therefore who might be able to reap the benefits of this kind of political favoritism. And voters themselves don't know who to ascribe these messages to, and therefore really how to interpret these messages to see what agendas they might be pushing. So this was suddenly 31% of all this spending was dark spending. We saw a vast majority of the spending coming from the super PACs that were set up after Citizens United and Speech Now, 61% of the outside spending from super PACs. But what was even more problematic is that we saw a huge rise in this spending by the 501c4 organizations, which are allowed under the tax code to not have to pay taxes on those contributions because they're meant to be social welfare groups that then also do a bit of pressing on issue advocacy. However, this has been really distorted beyond its intention, and we're seeing a lot of actual political spending, both on potentially issue advertising, but then really direct independent expenditures being spent directly to oppose or support a candidate through these dark money vehicles. What we're seeing here is that all of the well, this just breaks down, but what you need to know here is that even in the top spending races, we're seeing outside spending surpass candidate spending, which can be very difficult then to hold candidates accountable for the kind of outside spending that is actually happening in these races. And then this will show you that with the super PAC fundraising by source,
even these super PACs are actually raising money from the 501c4. So this, again, just showing the way in which the current campaign finance system can unfortunately sometimes be like a legal money laundering system. Because if donors are giving money to a group that then can mask the identity of the underlying donor, and then that donor can give to a super PAC, you're still not getting back to the initial underlying donor for that. There was a ballot initiative in, I believe it was Colorado, and it was just about a zoning law that people were going to vote whether the community supported changing the zoning law so that actually, in this instance, so that Walmart might be able to set up in their town. So that should be just a regular exercise in democracy, etc. What the voters of Littleton, Colorado didn't know is that Littleton Neighbors Vote No was actually set up and funded by Walmart. This happened in, I believe, the 2006 races in Colorado. So that's exactly the kind of thing where we really need to get to the bottom of these donors in order to know who is trying to exert their influence through our electoral system. So here, even when we're talking about candidate fundraising, a majority of candidate fundraising is happening in donations that come from over $1,000. And that, for the House donors, is just, 0.5% of the population. And for the Senate, it's 0.4% of the population. Clearly not in amounts that actual average Americans can actually contribute. And so what we're seeing is political fundraising and political contribution and then political outside spending being dominated by an elite economic, very small percentage of our country is being able to take and spend these financial resources that they're able to aggregate to translate their economic power into political power. So again, we're seeing that of all of the, almost 60%, you see this in the final right-hand column, almost 60% of all of the contributions raised by the super PACs that did so much outside spending in the 2012 election, 60% of that came from just 159 donors that gave over $1 million. So of all of the people in the country and all of the different, ideas that we all have, where our political discourse is dominated by these 159 donors that were able to give that amount of money, excuse me, what we see here is that 99 people were able to give above these $1 million, right, these are the actual individuals. So they're obviously, this is distorting our political discourse in how we're actually able, and even the dynamics of the race. I mean, regardless of one's partisan affiliation, one could argue that the existence of super PACs in the Republican primaries, as we all recall, really enabled certain candidates to maintain their presence in the race, potentially having detrimental effects, on other things, not because of the support of voters that were carrying them through the contest after contest, but because they had individual super millionaires in their back pocket that were maintaining their ability to compete in state after state. So, we often wonder whether that's really the way that we think that our political discourse is moving forward. This is, I think, a very disturbing graphic here, and we thought that it was interesting to break down because another side of this is that so many more small donors are currently able to enter into the system because of internet tools and the famous, in 2008, Obama had been able to motivate so many of his supporters to get involved at a small donor level. And so with both the Romney campaign and the Obama campaign, we're able to raise $313 million from really small donors, those giving below $200. And so those folks don't have to be itemized. But 32 individuals who each gave an average of about $10 million equaled that amount. So 32 donors who were giving to super PACs that were, supporting any of the candidates across the country were equal to the 3.7 million Americans who were getting involved as small donor participants to the presidential campaign. So clearly a system where we need to emphasize the voice of these small donors and figure out how to use policy to empower them. Otherwise, what we're going to see in our current system, where there aren't able to be any of these kind of limits, the Adelsons were clearly the the bugaboo of this super PAC system, but there's a reason. They gave about $92 million, which is a huge number for, I think, anyone in this room. But it's not a huge number for them. That's what we should understand when we think about the actual danger of big money in our system. When the Adelsons give $92 million to these various super PACs, while they are, of course, also under investigation by the Justice Department for various international business activities, that is only 0.37% of their net worth. Right? So then what we thought was interesting was to say, okay, for an average American family, if they gave 0.37% of their net worth, that would be $285, which would be a really sizable gift for a lot of Americans who are, month to month doing their budget, buying their groceries, God forbid somebody outgrowth some, shoes or what have you. So it would take 322,000 average Americans giving a very large contribution for them at $285 in order even to match what Sheldon Adelson and his wife were able to get. So that is really a system that is no longer, working for most Americans, and which has really, I think, contributed to one reason why we're, as Americans, have been losing faith in the idea that our representative government is actually representing the interests of average Americans. We're seeing this as just to see the other, business interests that give a whole bunch of money to both sides of the aisle is, of course, whether it's finance, insurance, and real estate, or, other business and lawyers and lobbyists, construction or agribusiness. There is a lot of money that comes into our governing system with its ties to interests that have very specific interests that they're trying to push forward. The Times, there was recently an article about Amgen and how the details have to do with kidney dialysis and Medicaid repayments. And the point is that a lot of these things get lost to those who aren't following every single issue at every single point of pressure in the government. But because Amgen and its lobbyists were able to provide so much funding to key members of various committees, the loophole the requirement that would have made Medicare transfer to a more cost-effective dialysis system, but would have cost Amgen a whole bunch of profits because they were currently making money off the current system. That requirement that Medicare switch to a more cost-effective basis that would benefit all of the rest of us has been postponed for 2 years with a windfall of millions of dollars to Amgen.
For a second time.
So that, right. So anyway, that is just a small bit of why this matters. What we're seeing, and I think, this is pretty common knowledge, but it's always fun when you get it up here with some pretty pictures, is that Americans really have begun to not only, hold their Congress in contempt, really, if you look at the recent polling numbers, but really just to find that corporations and corporate CEOs have too much political power and influence. Over 80% of Americans feel that way. Over 50% strongly agree. Even the corporate political spending drowns out voices of average Americans. What's fascinating about all of these things, and I think that this is the moment really in New York to take note of this and to make this a really important piece that we're all talking about, this condemnation and this understanding of the danger that we are currently in at this point in our democracy, it crosses all political spectrums. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, liberals, conservatives, moderates. We broke it down across all of these things, and everybody believes that, our voices as average Americans are being drowned out by corporate and special interest money, going from 94% amongst Democrats, but even 74% amongst Republicans. So no one should believe this issue to be some kind of liberal readout of good government. It really is something where everyone understands that as as an experiment in self-government of we the people, we need to be able to have control and not lose control when big money has more influence. So that, right, and so this is something where we just see that even though the court says that access to elected representatives and influence The court said in Citizens United that access and influence was not by itself corrupting of democratic government, but Americans don't feel the same way. Americans understand that, this was specifically about corporate political spending, this poll, but that really this kind of special interest spending is corrupting of government. And then the real question, and what I'll turn to as well, because Susan asked me to just touch on a couple things happening in the other states, the big problem is that if we all felt the same way about all of these policy issues, it might not matter. This is, sometimes people ask, well, there was so much, money, but it didn't necessarily buy outcomes. It matters where that money came from, and it matters that frequently the folks that have all of these big resources and have the huge, overwhelming amounts of money to inject in the system that drowns out the voices of the rest of us, is that we don't necessarily all come down on the same way about some of the most pressing policy issues that our government is facing. So for example, when you ask if the deficit is the most important problem, wealthy respondents are listing that 32% as the most important problem, but the general public, only 13% list the deficit as the most important problem. As opposed to the numbers are nearly flipped on their head. When you see that only 11% are listing unemployment of wealthy respondents as the most important problem, whereas 26% of the general public think that the levels of unemployment that we've seen in the last few years were the most important problem. And yet, what has D.C. been focused on for the past several years? Is it passing the kind of jobs program that, in the past, when dealing with this exact kind of recession, has helped to kickstart the economy in a much, more aggressive way? Or is it actually all of this deficit talk that has been dominating the situation, perhaps more in line with the interests of the wealthy donors than all of the rest? Again, these are the outcomes on these various economic metrics. The percentage of the wealthy folks that are in favor of a lot of these issues don't line up at all with what the general public is in favor of, but we do see government paying a lot more attention to the issues of the wealthy in favor. So we know that Americans oppose corporate political spending and oppose secret political spending, and that's certainly something that where we've seen really effective public financing programs be adopted, we are able to stop the secret flow of these expenditures because there's a lot more enforcement and disclosure, and we've been able to limit lots of special interest and private money coming in. And the support, again, over 75%. For the proposal in the second is what you see for public financing, that candidates could run for Congress without raising large contributions, and because they would be matched by private funds. So that, rather than going through some of the rest of the solutions, I wanted to talk about some of the solutions that we've seen in other states. Maine and Arizona and Connecticut all have full public financing systems at the state level. There are other public financing systems as well in place in North Carolina and in New Mexico. There was a program in Wisconsin for their judges, which is we're going to carve out something, well, that was recently taken away. But in Maine and Arizona and Connecticut, they've gone with a slightly different program than the program that has been so successful in New York City and that is now being proposed at the New York State level. But it's still been extremely effective, and particularly in Connecticut, where it was adopted most recently and really on the heels of a lot of political scandal. And so sometimes scandal is needed as the trigger. I think here in New York State, we've really been able to develop enough interest and hopefully enough leadership with Governor Cuomo that while we've had years and years of scandal, we might not need to see that continuing. In Maine and Arizona, in Maine, 3/4 of the state legislators that run with the public financing program. It's seen as extremely successful. The donors are more diverse. The candidates themselves are more diverse. They don't have to have access to, deep-pocketed donors before they even decide to run. One representative was quoted as saying, politics doesn't have to be a money game. You don't have to spend all of your time dialing for dollars. Janet Napolitano, one is the governor of Arizona and ran on with public financing, said that she had time to focus on her constituents, because public financing is the difference between being able to go out and spend your time talking with voters, meeting with groups, traveling to communities that have been underrepresented in the past, as opposed to being on the phone selling tickets to a $250 a plate fundraiser. And then one of the things that we're developing currently in order to support passage of public financing in New York State is looking at the way in which it has really affected policy making at the state level. So one of the real victories recently in Connecticut was that they were the first state to pass a mandatory paid sick leave bill. That had, tremendous support in the communities, but, not really supported by the business community. And yet, Connecticut was able to pass that through, much to the benefit of their constituents. This, of course, was after a big corruption scandal where the governor ended up in federal prison. But when they said the constituent contact has started to, when they were talking about how they'd adopted paid sick leave, they said constituent contact has started to outweigh the pressure of lobbyists. You still have to get out there and do the work of, developing support for your policy proposal, but public opinion is starting to matter more than lobbyist contact. And I think that that is exactly what we hope to achieve in New York State, is a system of funding our elections so that our government itself is one in which public opinion and the pros and cons of a policy itself and how it would meet its constituents' needs would be more important than a lobbyist opinion on the benefit of the bill. So I hope that this was useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liz Kennedy. And our next speaker will be Ian Vanderwalker of the Brennan Center for Justice of New York University.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring up my presentation. There I am. Okay, good. All right, so you've heard from Liz about a lot of things, but certainly the outsized influence of the people who have the most money and can afford to give the most to candidates and spend otherwise in elections. And you heard from Sally about weaknesses in New York State law with respect to campaign finance. One of the suggestions that the solution system suggested, as was mentioned, is a public financing system in New York State that could help to raise the voices of ordinary New Yorkers by matching their small donations. So New York City currently has a system like that, so I'm going to describe that system and some of the benefits of it. Governor Cuomo supported the idea of exporting this New York City system to New York State in the last State of the Union. It has supported a lot of people in the legislature, including many new members, although there are also a lot of people who are strongly opposed to it. So just a little bit about how New York City's public funding system works. First of all, it's a voluntary system. People don't have to enter into it. They can decide to raise money however they want within the other laws. Candidates qualify. You can't automatically walk up to New York City and say, give me public funds to run my campaign. You have to qualify by showing support in the community. And the way that that's measured is by showing that you've gathered a certain amount of money from a certain amount of contributors in your district. For mayor, this is the biggest limit. You have to gather $250,000 from at least 1,000 different people to show that you have enough support to then get public financing. And then public financing, the public funds aren't given out as a block grant. They're given out as the more small donations you raise of private money, the more public money that you'll get. So again, it rewards grassroots support. So public funds, as I said, are dispersed through matching grants that multiply the impact of small donations, again, from constituents, from people in your district, not from out-of-state special interests, but from the people that you'll be representing if you're elected. Again, it's a voluntary system. It comes with certain other strings attached that are designed to address campaign finance issues like spending limits, financial disclosures. You have to participate in debate. So I'm going to talk about 3 categories of benefits of this system, the fair election system, our public financing system that we have in New York City. Increased participation, more people are donating. People who've never donated before start donating. Increased diversity, the people who are donating tend to come from low-income communities, communities of color. And increased competition, because public financing means that people with substantial grassroots support can get money to run an election without having to go begging from big money donors. You see more people coming into the system to run, to challenge incumbents. So first, increased participation. As I said, more people are likely to, more people make small donations. New York City system hasn't always been the same originally. You see at least some coloring in virtually all of New York City. 90% of New York City, somebody who lives there made a small donation. And then the more red the colors are, the more people who live in that area gave money. So with matching grants, you encourage people to give small donations. More people are giving. This shows where New York City, this is just looking at New York City candidates, where did they get their money from? People who, on the left, yes, the left, that chart represents people who don't participate in the system. So these are people who are getting all their money from private donations. It shows that 66%, the great majority of their money, come from individual donors who give more than $1,000. These are people who can give $1,000 or greater, up to some very high contribution limits. Those are the people they're talking to. Those are the people they want to know what they want. When they go into office, they say, I'm going to, these are the people whose interests I'm protecting when I'm an elected official. But candidates who participate in the public funding system, this chart shows on the right, the private donations plus those matching grants, plus the public money. Now, those big donors are, the bar is much smaller, and the greatest amount of their money is coming from people who give between $1 and $250. The greatest amount of their money is coming from constituents in their district who are giving small donations, regular New Yorkers, and then now that's going to be who they're talking to when they run for office and whose voice they're thinking about when they make legislative decisions. So it radically changes where people get their money from and who's paying the price. And this rewards grassroots organizing. Because you need those small donors when you campaign, you're doing your fundraising from the same people that you're doing your campaigning with. You're not going to have a $1,000 plate dinner with Wall Street lawyers. You're going to talk to people in your district and have a house party where you have people give small donations. And Senator Lerner, who operated in both systems, says, make phone calls or knock on doors. They participate. It increases their civic participation in other ways. So the second benefit, increased diversity. Under the New York City system, more small donors come from low-income and minority communities. Again, this is compared to assembly races, looking just at the assembly races with no matching grants, no public funding, and the city council races with matching grants. In Bed-Stuy, predominantly black area community, you see 24 times more people give small donations. In Chinatown, predominantly Asian American, 23 times more, and in the heavily Latino communities in Upper Manhattan and the Bronx, 12 times more donations coming from those communities. So just to go through, again, the map to show how this looks, this is Bed-Stuy. The darker purple here represents a greater percent African American people living in those districts. So you can see virtually this whole rectangle has a high percentage of African American residents. This is the same area percentage living at or below the poverty level. You can see the darker colors mean more people at those low-income levels. Again, it's a lot of low-income members of the community there. Now here's the number of donors in each block group who gave over $175, just to $175 is the kind of magic number in New York City system. That's what counts as a small donation, $175 or less. So those are the donations that get those matching grants. And so this is the same area I just showed you how many people gave over $175. The blue is 0, and then the yellow is the lighter yellow is a handful, 1 to 5 donors. So not a lot of people giving it even at that low level. But then you look at between $1 and $175. These are the people who have that incentive of the matching grant. And again, the blue is 0. There's a few blue areas, but as the warmer colors up to red, it's more and more donors who live in that area. And you can see that it's these people who have been definitely encouraged by the matching grant and are giving more. And this is sort of the same story in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. These are the poverty levels. Again, darker areas are more likely to be lower income members. And again, this is the ethnic component. The more purple, the more Hispanic residents in those areas. So you can see, just back to a lot of low-income areas, a lot of Hispanic people in your communities. And again, people who gave over $175, a lot of blue, some yellow areas, a lot of these places where either 0 or a handful of people are giving those larger amounts above that threshold. And then with the $175, with the encouragement of the public matching grant, again, the red areas and the yellow areas are higher numbers of donors. So people are definitely have that incentive, and they react to it, and more people are giving in areas where people weren't giving before. People don't give without that matching grant. And then the third benefit I wanted to talk about is an increased competitiveness of races. We all know that there's a huge incumbent advantage. One of the main things that gives rise to the incumbent advantage is if you're an incumbent, donors want to talk to you. People who are rich, people who, special interests, corporations, they want to have your ear, they want to do you favors, so that you'll do favors back to them. So it can be very hard for a community leader who doesn't have those kinds of connections to just collect the money that it takes to run a campaign. Under the public funding system, again, you show that grassroots support, and you can have the small donations matched from in the district. Then you can achieve parity with an incumbent. You can raise enough money through small donations that are matched by public funds to spend, maybe not as much as the incumbent, but to spend enough to run a competitive campaign that will increase, the competition of either the primary or the general election in that district. And you see both established and newcomer candidates agree. Christine Quinn said the system makes it much more likely that a candidate who has only access to small donor status doesn't have those big special interest connections can run for office. And Councilmember Williams, who actually unseated an incumbent as a newcomer with this kind of grassroots support and participation in the public funding system, agreed. He said the availability of matching funds absolutely makes it easier for someone like me to run for office in New York. Under this system, we've seen, librarians, police officers, people who are just members of their community, leaders in their community, able to garner grassroots support, have they been able to run competitive campaigns, have been able to beat incumbents in some cases. And so it's changed the way, the incumbency advantage works. And even in cases, it's not about beating incumbents necessarily, it's about having elections where the voters have a voice. I mean, if nobody opposes an incumbent, then the voters, the election is in some sense meaningless to the voters' perspective. But where an incumbent is meaningfully challenged, they're going to have a conversation with voters in that district. They're going to have to participate in debate. So I'll end there. This is, as I said, this is being considered in Albany, and it's an exciting time. New York has a real chance to be a leader in this among the states. If you want more information about the campaign to bring a system like the New York City system to New York State, and I'm sure Susan is going to talk more about this also, but these websites have more resources. Thank you.
very much, Ian Vanderwalker. Our next and last speaker is Susan Lerner from Common Cause.
Thank you all, and thanks to all of the speakers. I mean, this is really a phenomenal program, encapsulating a lot of information, which I hope you're able to absorb. And I know I'm going to ask them for copies of the PowerPoint because I want to steal some of these really good slides. I've been asked to talk about the situation here in New York, and I'm going to go out on a limb, which I went out on this limb in December when I was getting the typical phone calls from reporters saying, well, what's going to happen in 2013? And I went out on a limb, and I have not changed my opinion. In 2013, for the first time in more years than any of us here can count, I am predicting we are going to see campaign finance reform pass in Albany. But campaign finance reform is a very big idea. Sally provided us with a wonderful list of things. Ian has talked to us about another solution, the public financing of elections. But I didn't say any one of those things was going to pass. Some form of campaign finance reform is going to go through Albany. But it's up to all of us here to ensure that it isn't just one thing, which, look, after the stride period, it is very tempting to say, you know, if we just had great disclosures, or if we got fantastic enforcement, oh my God, how many decades have we all been working to try and have a real campaign finance enforcement? We ought to call that victory, and we'll fight again another day. But my message to you today is that I think, for the first time in a very long time, that we have a possibility not just to get some campaign finance reform. We have a real possibility, if we are strategic, if we all work together, if we work with the governor, if we hold our representatives in the legislature accountable to their continued promises. You've got great state representatives who are going to tell you over and over again they believe in campaign finance reform. But it's up to us to tell them what we consider to be acceptable campaign finance reform. And my message is that I don't think it's any one thing. It's got to be more than just enforcement. It's got to be more than just disclosure. It's got to be more than just public financing, because that is how Albany divides and conquers, how they confuse all of us. They say, you really care about enforcement, we're going to give you enforcement. Those other folks who want public financing or they're concerned about disclosure, don't worry about them. We're going to give you what you want. And they'll come to other parts of the coalition and say, you know, the people who are really hopped up about public financing, that's a great idea. It's 5-10 years down the road. We'll give you disclosures, right? That's what you really want. So call that reform. You know, stand with us. We'll all take a victory lap. We'll worry about all that other stuff later. This year, I believe if we stick together, there is momentum building. Liz's slides about the feeling that people have that corporations and big money has much too much of an impact on our system comes from polling across the country. The polling in New York State is not significantly different, friends. If you talk to your friends who have refused to register as a member of a party, and we all have friends and family in that situation, many of them are younger friends and family, they will tell you that they don't trust any of the political parties because the system is rigged for wealthy people and special interests. But the amazing thing is that when you sit down and have a candid conversation with your friends who are Republicans, they're going to tell you the same thing. What does the Tea Party complain about? The Tea Party complains that the ordinary people don't have enough of a role in our system. So those figures where we are talking, the public does not like how we fund our campaigns and does not like the outsized influence of political money in our system. When we're talking 70 to 80 percentile, if any of you have worked on campaigns or done any kind of public polling, those are enormous figures. That is virtually unprecedented. And to see it across the political spectrum tells us something very important. We have a moment here. And I'm happy to say that New York seems to be the place in the country where we are building the momentum and the public support to actually do something truly significant about campaign finance reform. Which isn't to say that we haven't had some great things happen in other states. Connecticut and Rhode Island last year passed really outstanding disclosure bills. There are a couple of other places where we're looking at that. But here in New York, we have an opportunity to put together a far-reaching, multifaceted program. It doesn't just have one thing and we'll wait another 5 to 10 years for something else. We have an opportunity, if we work together and we work strategically, to get a lot of what was on Sally's list and public financing through the legislature. It's not going to be easy. We have to stay firm. We have to be willing to say, those of us who are public funding fans, we have to say, yes, that would be great if we get public funding, but it's not true reform if we don't have disclosures and enforcement or whatever the coalition decides is the full package. And for those of us who are disclosure and enforcement partisans, we have to be willing to say disclosure and enforcement without public funding is not going to be enough. And we've got to say it over and over and over again. One thing that is wonderful about leaguers and working with the league is that you get the fact that this is a long-distance run. We need to have our message go out. We need to take it out over and over and over again. And most important is that we have the message out here in the communities, because we can all talk until we're blue in the face in Albany. And we'll be talking to legislators in their Albany offices, and people will be calling their Albany offices. But when a state senator runs into a constituent at the dry cleaners, when the constituent says, "What are you doing about campaign finance?" I really want to see that happen. When they run into somebody at the supermarket who says, "I'm really upset about special interest money. Is this the year you're going to make it happen?" And when they pick up a local newspaper and there's a letter commenting about some excessive contribution that came from a particular industry. And for instance, outside I brought copies of a very detailed report we've done about the enormous amount of political spending by the gambling industry and how broad the people who are interested in seeing gambling in our state are. When reports come out, when you read something in the newspaper, when you hear something about a surprising donation that you were concerned about, my request to you, do what the League does best. Write, not just to the legislature, but write to the local paper. Over again. Have a goal. If the river towns can have a goal that every month, a minimum of once a month, there will be a letter about campaign finance in one of the local papers, not just the Journal News, but really the town outlets as well. If we do that, and if we do that here in Westchester, and we do that in Buffalo, and we do that in Utica, and we do that in the capital region, then we are going to be having very, very different conversations in Albany, because at the end of the day, what really moves our elected officials is hearing from constituents. And no one is better at that than the League and the Common Causers. We're going to be working with you at the local level. They need to hear from us. And then I believe we can do something that we have been dreaming about here in New York State for way too long. We can move our plans and our aspirations into reality. And we can say that at a time when nobody believes that you can get campaign finance and public financing passed anymore, we can show that they're wrong, that there is momentum, and that we can indeed respond to the concerns of the people practically. So I'm looking forward to working with you. I'm looking forward to mobilizing the League's grassroots, Common Cause grassroots, and really showing that this is a groundswell of support, because this is the year I believe we're going to achieve campaign finance in New York, and it's up to us to be sure that it's the campaign finance we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan Lerner. I think we are very fortunate to have such an excellent panel covering the spectrum of issues that are presented by campaign finance reform. And I'm going to take a quick break in the program so that postcards can be handed out. This is a call to action. The postcards are addressed to Governor Cuomo, calling for campaign finance reform, and I'm going to ask members of the Rivertown League to pass these out among the audience. You can give them back to us. We will stamp them and mail them and make sure they get to the governor. Okay, while those are being passed out, we have one prepared question for the panelists. And I will pose that now. After that question has been discussed for approximately 5 minutes, then we will begin to take questions from the audience. We ask that your questions be no more than 1 minute in length and not be sort of a personal opinion opportunity, although we value your opinions, but we just don't have time to hear them. The audience will, the panelists will spend 5 minutes addressing each particular question. We must break at 4 o'clock sharp. So that should give us about 45 minutes for our question and answer period. The question that the League of Women Voters of the Rivertown has posed, and this is because one of our primary functions is presenting candidates' night for debates during election season. Our question to the panelists is, can and how can debates play a bigger role in the future to counteract vicious and fraudulent attack advertising? So I ask any member of the panel who wants to jump in to address that question. Okay, Susan Lerner? Okay, so one of the things that is really outstanding about the New York City system, and it's true of all of the publicly funded campaign systems that we're aware of and come across the country, is that one of the systems sets up a contract, really, between the voters and the candidates. So the voters provide the candidate funding in exchange for specific promises which the candidate makes about how they will spend the money and how they will run their campaign. And one of the requirements is that the candidates must participate in a specific number of debates with both the other publicly funded and the non-publicly funded candidates. The requirement is all publicly funded candidates, but it ends up that when you have that kind of a debate, the non-publicly funded candidates want to participate as well. So sometimes I think one of the challenges that the League and those of us who like to sponsor debates have is in trying to get the candidates to participate, particularly the incumbent or better known candidates who feel that participating in a debate with a challenger is simply helping the challenger gain better name recognition and notoriety. A publicly funded system which requires the debate and which provides a mechanism for publicizing the debate, which is what the Campaign Finance Administration ends up doing, puts a much greater emphasis on the debate. It raises it up in the public's awareness because it's now an official, required participatory event. And I think that it helps to inform the public and to balance
the kind of negative advertising which candidates and their proxies can engage in when the candidates don't have to be in the same room together and look each other in the eye and answer each other's questions. So I anticipate one of the benefits of a public funding system will be to help us strengthen and improve our debates and make them more meaningful in the campaign.
Thank you, Ms. Lerner. Sally Robinson?
Well, I just have to second what Susan said, because we get every fall, we get in the state league office recurring questions from local leagues about what can they do, because the candidates will not show up for the debate. They can, they can organize them, they can publicize them, but many times the candidates don't respond to requests. They say they won't show up initially, or they say they will show up initially, and then a couple hours before the debate, they don't show up. And if you're having a debate for federal office, you can't have it with one candidate. So this is probably the biggest problem we have with candidate forums every election. So to the extent that candidates participating in public financing systems are required to do it, it's just all for the good.
Hey, Liz Kennedy, does DEMOS have a position about debate?
We support them.
That's good news.
I really couldn't have said better what Susan and Sally underlined. It is exactly the case that New York City requires debate participation when you're participating in public financing, and I think really talking about it as a contract to voters is one way to say this is, because we should think about public funding as an investment in our democracy, right? So obviously candidates really ought to be showing up at these debates voluntarily, but for whatever strategic reason they may currently choose not to. Once we choose to provide this public funding as an investment in our democracy and they choose to participate, it's one of the ways in which they're, paying back that investment by strengthening democracy for us all by engaging in debate.
And it's really interesting in New York to see actually that not just the league, but groups compete to be the officially sanctioned debate because there's such interest in having the candidates debate, both at the council level and at the citywide level, that groups get together and form some sort of a collaboration and then actually apply to the Campaign Finance Board with their creative ideas about how they will structure the debates and how they will be sure that the debates are actually publicized and distributed to the broader community in order to be considered an officially approved debate under the campaign finance system. So it puts a lot of emphasis on it.
Okay, I think we're ready for questions from the audience. And I see one from our very own State Assemblyman who has joined us today, Thomas Abenanti. Thank you for being here. We have a pass around microphone so that you can be
We're not on
recorded.
tape, I can probably speak loud enough for that. I'll be glad
Well,
to
we
take
are
it.
filming.
Oh, we are.
So we would like, I think, for the audience later, we would like to hear you. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
First of all, I want to thank you for doing this. I think that educating the public beyond just the soundbite of being in favor of public finance is very important. Or campaign finance reform, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's very important that the public understand at least some of the details. They won't understand everything that you discussed today, but the highlights of it I think is important. So I thank you for doing this. I think it's a great public service. Secondly, as you know, I joined the Assembly 2 years ago. I was pleased to see the record that the Assembly has supported the New York City system for the state for quite some time. So we're not the problem. I sponsored the bill last year that's sponsored by the Speaker of the Assembly. So clearly we're fully behind it. And we'll be putting in a bill again this year. I know just the other day I was asked if I still wanted to be on it, and I said, yes, of course I do. So the Assembly is not the problem. I think that when you come to the Senate, that you need to have a statewide strategy, and this is a great group to do it. I think you have to target the public in certain communities. As we saw with the gun control measures that were just passed, there was cooperation in the Senate because the numbers showed that Long Island, which has all Republican senators, hate to get partisan about it, but that's what's happening here. All Republican senators were moved by the fact that 70% of the Long Islanders said they wanted to ban these high-powered military-style weapons. And faced with those kinds of numbers, with the Assembly holding press conferences, we had a big press conference down in the city, and with the Speaker of the Assembly saying, we're going to pass the bills, and then with the governor coming along and saying, we're going to do something, it was very clear that the Long Island senators, whose population said they wanted the measure, were the people who had to move. I think you have to do the same thing here. I don't know what the crosstabs show, but it would be interesting to see where the support is greatest in which Senate districts, to see if we could target those Republican senators to join with the Assembly. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the Democratic senators are on board. A lot of them say that they're on board for something. So I would keep the pressure on. And I don't mind getting cards and letters, because it's nice to be able to walk in and say, hey, look, all these people support the position that I'm taking, so it's not just me, it's the public. So I think you're doing a great service, but you have to do it everywhere, and we have to have a statewide strategy on how to move this. The next point I'd make is I'd like to see you concentrate on public finance. Some of these disclosure things are nice, but let's face it, most of them are minor compared to public finance. What I'm concerned about is after you get a public finance system, then you get what happened on the federal level, where everybody declines it because the stakes go so high, and I don't know if that's happening in New York City. But I think the public finance piece of this should come first. If we have to choose one, that's the one I would choose.
My point is, I don't think, certainly at this stage, we shouldn't be choosing. We should be defining public campaign finance reform in the broadest possible terms, Tom, and not picking this versus that. I think there's a strong argument to be made that a publicly financed system without fixing the kinds of problems that Sally was explaining in terms of how broken our conventional campaign finance system is, it's just not the way we should go.
I don't disagree that we should do all of them, but I would hate to see us get disclosure without finance. That's my point. Well, I could do without disclosure if I had to, if I got finance. There's a whole series of reasons, one of which you didn't mention. If people are concerned about the leadership influence, the present system of private finance places so much power in the hands of the leadership. I didn't need leadership money to get elected or to get reelected, but there are a lot of others who do. And let's face it, the private money has no reason to come to me. I don't have much power in Albany beyond what most legislators have. If you really want to stop something or make something happen, you have to influence the leadership, the people at the top. And so that's where most of the money goes. Now, I don't complain about our leader. I happen to think Shelley Silver is quite a good leader, despite all of the criticism that he gets. It's amazing that we ever get anything done with 150 people from this big state. But on the other hand, there is an awful lot of power that is concentrated there and reinforced there because of the system that we have, the money system. And even gives the governor more power. We have a governor who's popular with how many millions of dollars does he have in the bank? Almost 20 million or whatever the number is. That makes him very powerful because he can afford to finance somebody to run against you if you're not in line with him. So this system, the finance piece of this, has so many implications and is really so important. So I would urge that the strategy concentrate on that. And lastly, just one final comment if I could. Debates for uncontested office. I have been very pleased to run many times as a county legislator and last year as an assembly member without an opponent. But I would really like to come to a debate. I think it's really important that you, not just for me, but for everybody, I think it's important that you ask questions and pin me down. Where are you on this issue? What do you think? You're running unopposed, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be questioned. And the only time, the newspapers do the same thing. There's no editorial endorsements. So the public doesn't even know you're running for re-election. You could be there for 10 years, fly right under the radar screen. And that's not good for democracy. I mean, like I said, nice to not have an opponent. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be out there talking to people and having somebody ask me questions, even if they're difficult questions. You won't have an alternative if you don't like my answer, but at least you'll know where I am on those issues. So I understand the federal problem. We don't have the same problem in the state, I don't believe.
Well, so it's a tax problem. There is also a 501. Many leagues fund their candidate forums through their 501c3, through their ed fund, and there is a federal tax problem with giving.
Well, maybe we should talk about that afterwards, see if there's some way around
That's
that.
why we tend not to do, that's why we really tend not to do single-person candidates.
Well, how about if you do a county-wide forum where you invite all the uncontested candidates? You'll have some Republicans and some Democrats. So at least somehow you have a discussion of issues going on during a political campaign, and it's not, because the turnout also is low, and the public doesn't know who's running, and so there's no reason for them to come out. And it just spirals down and spirals down. If we want to keep up the interest, I think you have to have events. I don't have an incentive to spend money and raise money during an off year to bring out a turnout if I'm unopposed. But you want to bring people out, and so I want to suggest that you create the interest. Taking unopposed candidates. I tried to suggest to News 12, for example. Why don't you have me and some of the other unopposed candidates on TV together? Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Abenanti. Do we have a question from the audience? Ms. Lane, would you like to?
You would remember my name.
Sorry.
My question.
Can I give you the microphone?
I think I probably speak loud enough. My question is this. I think that this, sending this little postcard is a nice idea, although I'm kind of like the kids with the stale mail and hope that this doesn't get lost. Have you given any consideration to moving this campaign to the social media?
We have groups across the state. We do social media. We have a very strategic communications policy. We've helped to get fair elections trending in different parts of the state at different times when various groups that participate in the coalition bring out a report or a study of some kind, and we put it out on all of our Facebook pages. We link to each other's work and messages. We will support it with Twitter. If there's something going on where there's, suddenly a big donation of some kind that looks kind of suspicious, then we'll put it out, a comment, we'll share ideas with each other on how to push it out through social media. What we are trying to do is, quite frankly, to turn up the heat every single way that we can. But I would like to share with you the conversations that I have had with my staff members who are former staff members in elected officials' offices. And I cannot emphasize enough how important sending an actual writing is today. When legislative offices at every level will get anywhere from 100 to several thousand emails or email petition signatures, and I don't want to say that those are not worth doing, but you have to remember the priority by which any legislator, and this is local, state, and federal, particularly true in Congress, but it works in all of the offices, the value of the communication is proportional to the amount of effort that you, the constituent, put into it. So a signature on an internet petition is worth, I'm going to use coin, a penny, and signing a email form is worth perhaps a nickel. A foreign letter or postcard that you sign and hand address is worth probably somewhere between a dime and 20 cents. Writing a letter that has the language that's been provided to you, that you print out on the computer and change a couple of sentences is worth probably 25 to 50 cents. But if you sit down and take a sheet of paper and write 2 of your own sentences in your own handwriting and sign it and either fax it or mail it in, it's worth $1.
Good to know. Do we have, something that we all should keep in mind and do as often as possible? Do we have any other questions in the audience? Yes.
I noticed that Public Citizen is very firm in their movement to pass an amendment to counteract Citizens United, and I would be interested to know your reactions.
So, Ms. Kennedy?
Sure. So that I'm glad that you surfaced that. There are several different kind of fundamental approaches to reform. Thank you. That are moving forward on parallel tracks, let's say. So one of the best things about public financing is that it is a effective and really, to a certain extent, revolutionary change of how, as Ian's slide showed, so much more money comes from actual small donors when you do provide the public matching. So that is a constitutional way in which we can really change the dynamic that money currently plays in our democratic government. However, the Supreme Court, through the last 36 years of jurisprudence since the seminal campaign finance case called Buckley v. Vallejo, has really kneecapped, apart from public financing, but a lot of policy issues to address the dynamic of the role of big money and its dominance in our political discourse and our elections. So a lot of groups have put a lot of stock in campaigns to actually amend the Constitution that in order to do any number of things, there are 3 types of amendments that are normally proposed. There would be one, to actually go all the way back to Buckley v. Vallejo and overturn the idea that money is speech. I personally do not believe that spending money is the same thing as political speech. But as I think Sally had mentioned, there are some justices that have continued through the last 36 years to say that money is speech and that you can't therefore put spending limits on candidates, and you can't put spending limits particularly on individuals who are self-funding their own campaigns, the Michael Bloomberg effect, for example. So that would be the Buckley v. Vallejo distinction or amendment. Then there's Just Citizens United. So it's really in the past couple of years this amendment campaign has gotten a lot of traction. Actually in Montana, not typically known as a blue state, Montana in this last election, about 75% of voters voted to instruct the congressional district from Montana to support an amendment to overturn Citizens United. And it was in Citizens United that said corporations have essentially the same right to spend money. They still can't contribute, or states are allowed to prevent them from contributing directly to candidates, but not from spending directly to support or oppose an individual candidate. So that is Citizens United when you're talking specifically about not allowing corporations to spend specifically to support or oppose a candidate. And then there are other amendments that really go to the broader question of whether corporations as creatures that were created as business entities by the state, right, and imbued with these various non-human elements like perpetual life, limited liability, a set of other things. So they've got all these great ways to aggregate a lot of wealth, which is excellent in certain ways for our economy, but now they are also being given more and more constitutional rights, which is therefore prohibiting us as a demos, as a democracy of citizens, from controlling some of those behaviors that we might find to be not the best thing for our society. So those are the three versions of the amendment. Lots of people are supporting it. In New York, I would say that we really are, as both Susan and Sally and Ian have pointed out, we are really at such a point where we have the opportunity, given the Assembly's support for public financing in the past, given Governor Cuomo's continuing and strengthening, really, support for this issue, we have the opportunity to be the first state after Citizens United to implement public financing, which is really currently the best chance we have to change these dynamics. So we're really firm supporters of public financing at this moment here in New York. Around the country, the amendment campaign maybe gives people an opportunity to talk about these issues on a broader level.
When you dream, you need to dream short-term and you need to dream long-term. Your short-term goals and dreams don't in any way undercut your long-term goals and dreams, and in fact, they help you build the movement that you need for the ultimate goal. So at Common Cause, we are very strong backers of the constitutional amendment resolutions on the ballot in Colorado and Montana. And we see that as part and parcel of the same effort to help deal with the problem of money in our political system. The short-term goal is to do everything that we can under the current Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution. Our long-term goal is to adjust our Constitution so it is consonant with the vision that we all share of a functioning democracy that represents the best for all of our people and is not for sale. And that's a constitutional amendment down the road.
Can I just say one more thing on that, which is that another long-term goal that would be these campaign finance cases have really been 5-4 in a lot of ways. So frankly, there's both amending the Constitution or there's just understanding that there is a better current way to understand our current Constitution, which is that the First Amendment is concerned both with freedom of speech and with the inherent political equality of us all, and therefore government has a responsibility to structure the system in which money affects government in a way that respects the political equality that is really the principle upon which our democratic self-government experiment is based.
Well, those of you who are league members here know that as state and local leagues on a question, a federal question, we're bound by what the League of Women Voters of the United States position is. And currently, the National League does not support any of the constitutional amendments that are out there. They're still studying. They have a committee, and the committee is studying the issue. I think there are significant problems with many of the amendments that are out there. I'm not familiar with the ones that Susan was referring to, but, you know, for example, the ones that say corporations are not people. Well, there are many other non-campaign finance ramifications of that. In addition, Sheldon Adelson, as an individual, was always able to go and spend this money. He could still do that outside of the confines of a super PAC. He could do it as an individual, and a constitutional amendment that addressed the status of corporations as people wouldn't do anything to impact that. So there are issues with all of them, and many of them have let's say, you know, ramifications that if they were totally thought through, everyone might think that this might not necessarily be the right way to go. So as the state league, we're following the lead of the National League, and we're currently not supporting any constitutional amendment.
Well, Sally raises an interesting point, which is, as Liz pointed out, there are several different approaches to how to amend the Constitution. At Common Cause, we've taken a different position. We are not endorsing any one particular amendment. but we believe that we need to build a movement to show our elected leaders that there is a true concern throughout the country that the issue of money in politics has gotten out of control and that we need to adjust the Constitution. So the measures that were on the ballot in Colorado and in Montana, which we helped to write and which we helped to pass, and which passed by extraordinary margins in the 60 and 70 percentile, are instructions to the state congressional delegation to work for a constitutional solution, not which constitutional solution, because we know that the process of legislation should answer many of the questions that the League is exploring, and that a vigorous debate in Congress, airing all of these different concerns, and negotiating and building a consensus for the best way to solve the problem through an amendment is what we need to see. So we've been backing an instruction to our delegation, and we back that at the state level as well.
All right, thank you. Do we have, yes, another question from the audience? Would you like to come forward and I'll give you the microphone so it can be shared with our videotape audience?
We're a majority of women here. When women get equal rights, how will this affect campaign finances?
The question is, how would equal rights for women affect campaign finance?
Give this question to Ian.
As the only man on the panel. I think there's a lot of things that could mean. One of the exciting things that I talked about was in terms of matching grants and public funding is the increase in the voice of the people who actually reflect the population. So in places where, as I talked about, the population is majority, some racial minority or ethnic minority or low income, those are the people who end up donating more, rather who are more likely to donate and give small donations. And so their voice is lifted up by a public financing system, and that creates the opportunity for campaign finance to be reflective of the actual demographics of the community, which is, again, it lifts up regular people's voices and without drowning out anybody's voice, lowers the relative influence of the special interests, whether they be corporate boards, which are disproportionately male, or millionaires and billionaires, which are also disproportionately male. So I think that there's, the most exciting thing about public financing, which incidentally is constitutional under Citizens United and would address problems that even overturning Citizens United would not address, that, as Sally talked about. So I think, that's, to me, the idea of lifting up everyone's voice and making the money that goes into campaign coffers that candidates then have to decide how to spend, whether on TV advertisements or otherwise, making that money reflective of the community, as in everybody had a similar voice, to give that money and have that candidate be responsive to those people. I think because of the effect on diversity and making that reflective community should lift women's voices as well as other people who aren't as represented in corporate boards and millionaires clubs around the country.
That's a really interesting lens through which to see this, and I would add to Ian's point that you also see a greater diversity in the candidate class in terms of who would actually run. So I remember when looking at the experience in Maine, you found kind of the waitress, who had 2 kids and was working as a waitress in Maine, is suddenly, because she knows that she will be able to, if she collects, small donations from her community, she knows that Maine will help fund her campaign, and so then she can run on the strength of her ideas, instead of because she has grown up with access to just knowing a bunch of people who maybe have their own large amounts of money. So you no longer have to be come from the old boys club in order to actually decide to run. And I think that that really benefits a lot of women candidates. And I wish I could remember the name of this waitress in Maine that I'm actually really thinking of. And then I think that another huge advantage that we should not lose sight of at all is some of the ways in which if public policy reflected better, and by public policy I mean government laws, right? The actual way in which our society is structured for rules, laws, and regulation, public policy, if it had a more progressive bent or reflected better the actual expressed opinions of the community, that would frequently benefit women in their perspectives. See the example of paid sick leave in Connecticut. I mean, if you just look historically, and I do not have the numbers on this, of whether women supported it more or whether women frequently take the paid sick leave in order to either stay home sick or take care of a sick relative. But I think that's exactly the kind of element, if you're trying to get child care through Congress, that might not be a priority for the Adelsons or big corporate money, but that might be something that is really supported across the country. And so if you're able to see policy more reflective to real concerns of real people rather than dominant economic interests, I think that that would have a real bread and butter make a difference in women's lives.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? No. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, just it's about the your thing. Can I put my own sentence beside the one that you
Oh, the question is whether you can add something to the yellow postcards that we passed out. And by all means, please add any thoughts that you wish to. As Ms. Lerner pointed out, that will give it much more value. So,
Valuable, but it'll do that.
Great. So I urge you all to fill in the postcards as you see fit, and we will collect them in a few minutes, or as you leave, someone will be sitting at the table by the entrance. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can I also say a point?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, since we are here.
Let me give you a.
I mean, it's just since we are here in the League of Women Voters, and it's about the debates. I know, like 30 years ago, actually the League of Women Voters were in charge of doing the debates for the president and all of that. I don't know if you could give us some kind of history how actually we lost that power of making those, being the ones in charge of those debates. Now we have actually companies and corporations doing that, so they only give voice to the Republicans and the Democrats. In my case, I don't vote for neither. Last time I voted for Jill Stein, which is who was the candidate for the Green Party. That's my concern about the debates.
Okay.
Well, this was before my time, but my understanding of the history is that the presidential candidates themselves, their campaigns took over control of the format for the debate, and at some point the league could not reach an agreement with the candidates' campaigns about how the debates would be run. So that's why the league stopped doing the presidential debates. And they're now controlled by, basically, I think it's a committee that's controlled by the major party campaigns.
Right, I don't know that if our panelists have the information available in terms of how the presidential debates are organized and structured now. That it was a very good question and one that we might address at a future forum, closer to the next presidential election perhaps. But I think unless there's another question from the yes, we do have one last question from the audience. Can you come up and get a microphone?
I am not sure exactly how to phrase this. I've been sitting there trying to put it in my head. I am in a district which was changed. My state senate was changed, and we had a new candidate who was formerly in the assembly. The literature that I received every single day was full of horrendous statements. None of them were what the candidate would do. It had to do with how much he spent for dinner, what cars he was driving, stuff like that. Every single day, very glitzy campaign material. The address for this was a PAC in Virginia. I tried to do research. Every candidate that they were against was a New York State candidate, not one candidate from outside New York. So this is my question. How will campaign finance be able to prevent an organization from outside the state from spending this fortune of money on accusations that I don't, if they're true or not, but they couldn't all be true. I mean, they're so crazy. But I know there is a lead committee on fair campaign practices, and that's one outlet that candidates have. But my question is, how will campaign finance work, or will it work, to prevent this type of bombardment of stuff?
Well, the short answer is it won't, and it can't. What it can do is have much better disclosure of who is paying for the ads and of what candidate they're linked to. It can have immediate disclosure of that, but no, even if we had the best independent expenditures disclosure law in the country in New York State, it's not going to keep outside groups from coming in and making independent expenditures in New York.
Because of the state of the U.S. Supreme Court interpretation. But what we can do in addition to disclosures is with a publicly funded system, it is the only counterbalance which a candidate has, knowing that they have the resources to communicate directly with the voters and to correct the misinformation which these independent expenditures are putting out. It remains to be seen down the line if and when we amend the Constitution whether we would have a different set of circumstances which would allow us again to control these kind of independent expenditures as we were able to do somewhat before Citizens United.
Thank you. All right, thank you all so much for coming. We have small tokens of our deep appreciation for the breadth of information and for the efforts made by each of our panelists in coming here on this very cold day to share this highly important information with all of us. And with that, I'm going to conclude the afternoon's program. Thank you again to Sally Robinson, President of the New York State League of Women Voters, to Lerner,
Vanderwalker of the Brennan Center for Justice of New York University. Thank you.
And a little ad, there's a sign-on list outside from Common Cause. If you're interested in getting our New York State updates, please sign up.
Okay.